My great-grandfather was not a good person by any means. In the 30s, my country was under the iron grip of a violent dictatorship, and it's with great shame that I have to say he was deeply involved in it. My great-grandfather was a torturer and murderer, working for a state that violated human rights and massacred its own population on a daily basis. Ironically, he was a very religious Catholic man and seemed to think there was no contradiction in going to the Mass in the morning and then going on and killing people in the afternoon. In the 40s, when the dictatorship was being toppled, my great-grandfather felt the cold breath of justice on his neck. And being a devout Catholic man, he had been telling all of his dirty deeds to the priest. He then did what he did best. He kidnapped the priest, executed him, and dumped his body in the same woods he had dumped all his other victims. In a weird way, my great-grandfather escaped human justice, but not the justice of God, or, if not God, whatever had been slaughtering his descendants since then. No one denounced him, and his name was only publicized to be a ruthless state-sanctioned killer many decades after his death. However, even if most never knew who he really was, apparently someone did. He was found violently murdered a few years after the dictatorship was no more. His body had been crucified, his throat cut, and his eyes gouged out. Justitia caega est, memoria eterna est. Love is blind, memory is eternal. It was written in blood on the wall next to his body. Yes, his body was found in the church that the priest he killed used to preach, next to the altar in the place the statue of Jesus used to be. The statue itself was never found. After my great-grandfather's demise, whatever ended his life went after my great-grandmother. She was living in a small farm in the countryside. I don't know if she just wanted to move to a rural zone or if she was trying to escape the ones who killed my great-grandfather. If it was the latter, it didn't work. In 1975, she was found crushed to death under the family's tractor. Written in blood on the door of her house, the same Latin words were written next to her deceased husband. Justitia caega est, memoria eterna est. My grandfather was next. In the late 80s, he suddenly came home, screaming that Jesus wanted to kill him. My grandmother told him to leave, believing he was drunk. He left, and on that was the last time anyone saw him. And a few years later, the curse passed on to my grandmother. My father found her one day after coming back from school. There was a wooden cross with a sharp stake-like handle embedded in her chest. There was bleeding, but alive. She was taken to the hospital, and whenever someone asked her who did that, she would firmly say, Jesus. It happened again. A few days later, she was found in the hospital's chapel, nailed to the cross on the wall, replacing the statue of Jesus, her wrist cut and filling the floor with blood. As she was already in the hospital, they managed to save her, and a police officer would then be on her room at all times. The Jesus figure was never found. After this, my father's family would always be on the move. They were always renting different houses, moving around between states and cities, and only Protestant crosses were allowed in my grandma's vicinity. She managed to survive for a long time using these precautions, long into my father's adulthood. She also had 3 children before her husband disappeared, and all of them were aware of the curse, and this ended up benefiting me a lot in the long run. One day, even with all her precautions, she had to attend a courthouse hearing as a witness, Despite the state being secular, for some reason to this day all courthouses had Catholic crosses. That means a cross with an image of Jesus. 3 days after the hearing, she was found dead, with her neck horribly deformed. When they opened it, there was a mass of wood stuck in her throat. A mass that was actually the crumpled figure of Jesus. The cross in the courthouse was, of course, empty. Someone wrote the same old message on the wall under it with a knife. Justitia caeca est, memoria eterna est. I was already born by that point, and I remember going to her funeral. It was either 2006 or 2007, a funeral that none of her children attended. No one knew who the curse would pass to then, and cemeteries, as everyone knows, are full of crosses and statues of Jesus. It turned out the curse passed on to her oldest child, my aunt. She didn't last long. 3 years after the funeral, she was found dead in her apartment. The door had been broken and someone had entered and beaten her to death. Her face was so destroyed that they had to use teeth to confirm it was really her corpse. As per tradition, someone had written on the wall using her blood, Justitia caeca est, memoria eterna est. Yes, it turns out one of her neighbors had a human-sized Jesus statue, a statue that was never seen again after the killing. She had no husband or children. This meant the curse would pass on to the next person of the bloodline. When my family was informed of the murder, he immediately knew he was next. With my great-grandmother, it took more than 20 years for the curse to get to her. With my grandfather, it took around 10. With my aunts, it took 3. The time span was getting shorter every time. If the pattern kept that way, he imagined, he'd have around a year or 2 at most before an angry Jesus statue was on his doorstep, intending to kill him in a gruesome manner. After that, it would be my uncle's time, and then my mom, and finally, me. My father had a smart solution. He sold everything he had, bought a boat, and sailed away. I would only see him once or twice a year after this. During my birthday and his birthday, he briefly anchored his boat and we went over there to see him. But as much as my mother loved him, she couldn't handle this type of long-distance relationship. They ended up divorcing, and my mother started dating another man, a very wealthy former federal agent. Maybe this would free her from the curse after all. Well, it didn't. I don't know how my father died, but when he stopped showing up, we figured that either Jesus had caught him or something equally bad happened. Regardless, when my uncle was found crucified on the ceiling of his office with the message, Justitia caeca est, memoria eterna est, carved on his chest, we knew 2 things. 1, my father was dead, and 2, the curse would soon be passed on to either me or my mother. My mother decided to live the same way my grandmother did before she passed away. She bought a trailer, a shotgun, pistols, and started teaching me how to shoot. From then on, I would live with her and my stepdad on the road, never spending more than 3 days in the same city. And yet, we had close calls. Once, while we were sleeping, the windshield shattered and I saw a very familiar man-sized figure entering the trailer. It moved its limbs, but it didn't blink or move its head. On its hand, it carried a large shard of glass. The Jesus statue headed towards my mother, ready to stab her. I grabbed one of my pistols and shot the figure. The arm carrying the shard fell off its body, but it quickly crouched, grabbed the shard again, and once again moved towards my mother. My aim was not very precise, and I did not hit it this time. It managed to stab one of my mother's hands, cutting off 3 fingers before my stepdad blasted the thing with the shotgun. We then grabbed the still contorting limbs and pieces and burned it all. Then there was also another time that we came even closer to dying. My stepdad was driving the trailer when, out of nowhere, an out-of-control truck came in at very high speed behind us, almost crashing into our back. Stepdad quickly skidded, almost overturning the trailer. For a few inches we avoided the truck obliterating our vehicle. The truck violently crashed into a car that was in front of us in the road, causing an explosion, and the crash caused a lot of oil on fire to spread around the road. My mother and I grabbed our guns, knowing this could very well be the work of the curse, and indeed it was. From inside the burning truck, a wooden man-sized figure of Jesus came out, burning in flames and covered in oil, blood, and debris. Father quickly pressed the pedal, and soon we were getting away from that place as fast as possible. What we didn't count is with how fast it was able to run. The trailer was reaching 80 kilometers per hour, and yet the burning statue was almost reaching us. My mother opened the back glass and shot at it with the shotgun. The bullets blasted off its head, but it kept running faster and faster, and it managed to catch up with us. The thing jumped inside the trailer, breaking the back glass and setting the carpet on fire. My mother shot it again, creating an enormous hole in its torso. Yet, the Jesus image kept going, grabbing her shotgun and bending it with an impossible strength. I grabbed one of the pistols and shot it again, managing to destroy its legs. My stepfather then braked the car. The Jesus was thrown away toward the windscreen, shattering it and being thrown out on the road. While it used the fire extinguisher, my stepfather made sure to run it over several times until only broken pieces remained. After this incident, my mother decided to leave me on my stepfather's care and said farewell to me. We already had cell phones at this point, so I kept constant contact with her. Every day she called. She would tell me how the attacks were getting more fierce and continual. The curse was intensifying, trying new tactics to get her. Disguised statues, multiple attackers, even one armed with a rifle once. She lasted for years. I managed to build a life for myself. I have a stable job, an apartment, a girlfriend. But several days ago, she simply sent a message saying, "I'm sorry." Yesterday, when the police knocked on my door, I was already expecting the news. What I didn't expect is how fast the curse would move on this time. They weren't knocking to tell me my mother had been murdered. They were knocking to tell me my stepfather had been brutally murdered. He had been stabbed more than 100 times, and someone wrote with blood next to the body, "Justitia caeca est, memoria aeterna est." There will be no 20, 10, or even 3 years from me. The thing is probably already coming. I broke up with my girlfriend, and I pray this will be enough to save her. Maybe there's a way to break this curse. I sincerely doubt I will have enough time for that. I only hope that this curse ends with me. I don't have the same willpower or strength my grandmother or mother had. I don't think I'll last even a single encounter with the statues. The wooden boards covering the windows of my apartment were easily broken by the Jesus statue as it effortlessly made its way into my apartment. I quickly got out of bed and grabbed my shotgun that was already loaded and laying next to me. The statue advanced towards me, the hooks it had used to climb to my apartment on its hands. I pointed at it and shot. The statue flew back toward the wall, and I shot again and again and again until only pieces of it remained. I immediately had to change my pants afterwards. There's something in the absolute fear of facing death that throws your dignity out of the window. So, I survived the first attack. It would only get harder from then on, I thought, as the police officers put me inside their car. I didn't even protest when they took my shotgun and apprehended me for reckless usage of firearms. Well, telling them how statues of Jesus had been trying to kill me would result in them locking me in a place for mentally ill patients, which are usually full of Christ imagery. I wouldn't live for much longer anyway. They locked me in a small individual cell in the back of a police station and told me to sit tight for the next 2 days or so as my case was being processed. I didn't have a lawyer, and I did not care enough to try and hire one at that point. It would be useless. There was a small crucifix with a small Jesus on the corridor of my cell. It was a matter of time before that inanimate object became very animated and turned me into the inanimate object. So, you must imagine how surprised I was when one of the officers told me my lawyer was there to see me. I informed her I did not have a lawyer, but the policewoman told me someone had probably hired him for me. I asked her if she wasn't sure the lawyer wasn't a Jesus statue in disguise, but she just laughed. Trembling, I went to the meeting room for my possible doom. Luckily, the lawyer wasn't a disguised Jesus, but a priest, who also happened to have a law license. Father Abraham Hudson. No, this is not his real name. He was an Englishman who seemed to be in his late 50s and yet on a great physical condition and spoke perfect Spanish with no English accent at all. While talking to him, I discovered that the priest was also a polyglot and a scholar. He spoke French, Czech, Latin, Italian, Spanish, English, German, Portuguese, and some basic Greek. Hudson told me that the Vatican had been informed about my case and had discreetly sent him to investigate and figure out a solution. The curse that had been affecting my family, he told me, was extremely rare, but not unheard of. There had been 3 other known cases in the past, and in one of them, they managed to almost break the curse, and he was the one leading the effort. He showed me a Polaroid picture dated from 1991. It depicted the body of a teenage boy, full of fractured exposed bones and contorted limbs, being removed from the Seine River by the French police. He then gave me a copy of the file he had written when he worked on that poor boy's case in the 90s. I asked him if I could share it here, and he allowed me to, provided I change all the names to fake ones. According to him, this file is the key to save my life.
I'm writing this report to help us deal with future instances of this particular curse, should the need ever arise again. What we are dealing with is a terrible curse that eliminates entire lineages and uses figures of our sacred faith for nefarious purposes. Before we proceed, I must say that we failed in protecting Philippe Désolé and that our failure in doing so costed his life. However, his sacrifice shall not be in vain, as the knowledge we acquired with this case will certainly help us deal with similar matters in the future. The curse manifests in a simple yet dangerous way. Statues of certain saints come to life and attempt to murder members of certain bloodlines in any way they can, which are often very gruesome, before leaving a message written next to the body and seemingly vanishing. The statues can be of any size, and it appears that each statue has different abilities or strategies. These statues can still be destroyed, however, and there appears to be a cooldown between attacks from the possessed objects. If an attack fails for any reason, be it destruction or contamination of the attacker, this cooldown occurs. It can range from 2 days to a month, or years in earlier stages of the curse. Before we get to Philippe Désolé, we should discuss the reports about this curse that came before him. that I managed to locate in the Vatican confidential files. These were very old reports, and their states of conservation were far from ideal. The first instance occurred in the late 16th century, and there's not much detail, apart that it occurred in Portugal in the late 15th century and resulted in the annihilation of a small village. I and other priests, several of them Portuguese, spent a lot of time looking for information about this one, but we couldn't find anything. Probably the documents, if there were ever any, are long lost or destroyed. The second known instance of this curse occurred in Prague during the early 17th century. The report simply says that a cardinal specialized in dealing with dark sorcery was dispatched from Rome to Prague to help deal with the curse that had been terrorizing a family of bakers involving statues of Jesus coming to life. We have a bit more information about this one, but I had to do a bit of in-local research. I went to Prague and spent several weeks in local libraries researching for information. The tale had become something like an old forgotten legend. There were only a handful of mentions in very old books. The most recent was a book of kids' fables published in 1914. I found in total 4 versions of the story. I analyzed all versions and attempted to find common elements, prioritizing the oldest versions. And hopefully I could get as close to the truth as possible by doing this. The curse was inflicted upon a family of a baker called Pavlicek from a neighborhood of Nové Město. The reasons for this are not well known, but I found mentions of sawdust bread being sold in his establishment. Although it's improbable someone would be cursed with such a harsh fate because of this, Pavlicek was found roasted in his own oven, and someone wrote on the bakery's wall, Fata Ereticorum, the fate of heretics. Notably, a notorious stone statue of Jesus that resided on the square next to his bakery disappeared, and eyewitnesses claim they saw the statue entering the bakery around closing hours. It is my personal theory that he could be a Protestant, which could be the reason for him being cursed, as Protestantism was on the rise during this time, but was extremely rejected by the Habsburg dynasty. But this is just a theory, a religious theory. Regardless, Pavlicek was the first victim of the curse that time, but not the last victim. Pavlicek's son took over his bakery, that is until circa 15 years later, when he was found dead on the bakery. Sources diverge on how exactly he was killed. Some say he was simply found strangled to death with a rosary inside of his bakery. Others that he was also quartered with a cleaver. Regardless, the new statue of Jesus that was installed after the first one went missing was also lost. Then, the Pavliceks moved their bakery to another neighborhood, believing it was the location of their shop and not the family itself that was cursed. They moved their bakery to the neighborhood of Stare Miesto, but the street that they reportedly relocated to, Pogvodnikova Cesta, seems to no longer exist, as I've found no record of it. There, the Pavliceks would find out that it wasn't their old bakery that was cursed, but their family. 7 years after the previous murder, the widow of the last baker was found brutally murdered in a local church. The statue of Jesus was missing, and the poor woman had been nailed to the crucifix on the wall. One of my sources claimed she had also been decapitated and her head exposed on the church's altar, but the others do not confirm this information. What all sources do agree is that Fata Ericorum had been carved on her chest. The statue of Jesus of that church was nowhere to be seen. At this point, the family came to a local church and begged for help. People had been avoiding them, afraid of being cursed too, and their business was drowning in debt, as no one wanted to sell them wheat or meat, and no one wanted to buy anything from the cursed family. The Archbishop asked the Vatican to send a specialist in curse breaking, and the Vatican sent a cardinal. Although nothing else is confirmed, there is indeed a letter in the Vatican files from the Archbishop of Prague requesting help to deal with the curse of statues afflicting a family. So, even if we can't verify the veracity of most of the history, we do know at least the call for help existed. Now, the end of the story gets messy, and we do not know with certainty what happened. The newest sources claim that the Vatican priest was able to save the family, spending 7 days and 7 nights in an exorcism ritual that costed him an eye. No other members of the family perished by the hand of the Jesus statue, but they were so traumatized by all the events that they decided to leave town, and no one saw any of them ever since. In my personal opinion, this ending is probably untruthful, as I'm certain that the cardinal will write a detailed report if he had indeed lost an eye in an exorcism. Aggression against priests during exorcism rites is somewhat common, but almost never to such an extent. The end of the Pavlicheks, according to older sources, was a bit more tragic. Even before the cardinal arrived in Prague, another statue of Jesus came to life and brutally murdered another member of the Pavlichek, this time by defenestration. The population then decided that the Pavlicheks were not only cursed, but they were infecting the city with evil, and then they lynched the family and burnt their house and bakery down. Sadly, I think this is way more probable, and the reason that the Vatican has no further reports about this case. I reflect, it's because there was no one left there to save, as the Pavlicheks had all been murdered. In the case of Philippe Désolé, I was able to observe the case in person. The whole reason I spent weeks in Prague was because I wanted to save him by studying the previous iterations of the curse. However, even if I wasn't able to save him, I have reason to believe I was very close to doing so. Désolé's ancestor, Jean-Michel Désolé, was one of the top lieutenants of Jean-Baptiste de Carrier. During the height of the reign of terror of the French Revolution, he was personally responsible for rounding up Catholic priests and nuns and anyone suspected of aiding the pro-monarchist Vendée insurrection, or anyone related to anyone who rebelled. These people were subsequently either drowned en masse in the Loire River, shot, or guillotined. Reportedly, Jean-Michel and his men also committed extremely deplorable sins against the female prisoners. After the fall of Robespierre, Jean-Michel Désolé was tried along with Carrier for war crimes and guillotined. Bearing reprisals, this family moved away from France and only returned during the last years in the reign of Napoleon. Apparently, one of the reasons that made them move back to Paris was when, around 1813, one of their family members was found brutally murdered in the city they were currently living, but I wasn't able to find many details about this death. Then, in 1821, another member of the Désolés was found dead. In this case, I was able to locate the original report in the files of the police prefecture of Paris. Clotilde Marie Désolé, daughter of Jean-Michel Désolé, was working by selling flowers on the street when she was stabbed to death by a person that was reportedly disguised as the Blessed Virgin Mary. This aggressor wrote Justitia Provende using Clotilde Marie's blood before jumping into the Seine River and disappearing. Eyewitnesses were so shocked and scared that they didn't do anything, probably suffering from some sort of bystander effect. In 1826, another member of the Désolé family was killed by a person reportedly disguised as the Blessed Virgin Mary in a lavender field in southern France. Although this time I wasn't able to find the cause of death and where it took place exactly. Then, the time span kept getting shorter. In 1828, another Désolé was found dead, this time drowned in a puddle right after a night of heavy rain. Justitia Provende had been written with chalk on the door of his house. And in 1829, another death occurred when Marionnette Désolé was murdered by a person dressed as the Blessed Virgin Mary, who killed her with its bare hands by breaking her neck. However, this time a policeman called François Delacroix was there. The officer went after the murderer, but to his shock, when he hit it with his baton, he discovered that he had hit a statue of the Blessed Virgin Mary that was moving like it was alive. The statue ran away and Delacroix chased it, but when the statue turned into a corner, it disappeared. Delacroix wrote a detailed report to the Paris police prefecture, but he was deemed insane and his license was revoked. In 1832, 3 more deaths had occurred, one of them extremely brutal, involving 2 Désolés being dismembered and then sewn back together in a single horrendous human corpse. The police tried to investigate the case to no avail, but it appears that Delacroix decided to conduct his own independent investigation. Most of the information concerning Jean-Michel Désolé had been lost after an angry mob invaded the National Convention and either stole or burnt the files concerning Désolé's trial in the insurrection of 12 Germinal in 1795. The information that I gathered about Désolé being a top lieutenant of carrière and participating in the atrocities of Vendée was actually uncovered by Delacroix after he interviewed people that had lived through those tumultuous times. The fact is that Désolé's family, which was very large, as Jean-Michel had 13 children, and each of those children would end up having at least 1 child, did not know the involvement of their ancestor with the Reign of Terror. This information had been hidden by the late wife of Jean-Michel Désolé, who was also probably the first victim of the curse. Then Delacroix, who over the course of this investigation involved himself romantically with a member of the Désolé family and feared that he was himself now a possible victim, sent letters to the church asking for help. The church sent an Italian exorcist who Delacroix simply identifies as Father Giuseppe to aid in solving the curse. After several failed exorcism attempts and 4 more violent deaths, Father Giuseppe found a way to save the family. Once a year, the family would have to visit the place where the victims of their despicable ancestor had been laid to rest and apologize. They managed to get there and do so, but during this voyage, the curse struck as never before, and 5 family members were killed in a span of a week. After the apology, however, the murders stopped. Delacroix himself was murdered, but his now widow kept his diary. It was stored in the Désolé's cellar. Fast forwarding to the 1970s, for some reason the Désolés stopped doing the ritual of visiting the Loire River. Most of the information in this part comes from interviews I conducted with Philippe Désolé. Maybe after the May '68 protests, the family decided that it was an outdated tradition derived from a forgotten legend. Regardless, when I discovered how to stop the curse, Philippe was already dead. In 1977, Jeanne Désolé, the grandmother of Philippe, was found hanging from her ceiling. She had been brutally mutilated, and the statue wrote Justitia Provende on the floor among her remains. Then, on 1985, Maurice Désolé, the father of Philippe, was found frozen to death. He had been put inside the family's freezer and the door had been chained. The phrase Justitia Provende had been written with chalk on the freezer. And in 1989, Christine Désolé, mother of Felipe, was found headless in her bed. The phrase Justitia Provendi had been written with her blood on the wall above her bed. Until that point, Felipe and the police were treating the case as some kind of murderous cult or serial killer. The case of Isia Sagawa was still fresh in the mind of the Parisians when Felipe barely survived an attack by a small wooden figure of the Blessed Virgin Mary. He came to the church for help. At that time, I was studying unrelated subjects in the Catholic Institute of Paris, and one of my superiors sent me to help Désolé. We put inside our most secure room in the basement of one of our churches near Paris that was used as a stronghold during the Middle Ages, and I personally hired a security team to protect him while we looked for a way to save him from the curse. But I must say that I made a grave mistake and utterly failed in assisting Felipe. I went to Portugal and then to Prague and spent months looking for ways to save him by looking into the past, and I focused so much in the past that I did not see what was right in front of me all along. After spending 2 months surviving attacks from crazed statues of the Blessed Virgin Mary, including some very close calls, Felipe decided to head back home and die in dignity. He had given me a key to his house, which could help me. When I came back and finally looked around his house and found a diary, he had already been murdered. As I finished reading the report, I looked at Father Abraham Hudson and thanked him. I now knew what I had to do and where I had to go. I just needed to wait 2 more days now, and I would be free to do it. The diaries of Delacroix said that when the Désolé family went to apologize in the Loire River, the curse struck like never before. I knew it could happen to me, but I did not imagine the extent. On my second day arrested, while I waited that Hudson secured my release, I had to go to the bathroom. After finishing my necessities, I was accompanied back to my provisional cell, which was located at the end of a claustrophobic corridor of empty cells. And then, as I was walking, the lights went out. The guard accompanying me turned on her flashlight and pointed to the corridor, illuminating the way to my cell. I made my way back, and when I approached the already open cell door, I heard something dropping to the floor behind me. The light disappeared. I looked back. The lights on the ceiling started flashing as I heard the police station generator being turned on outside the building. The officer accompanying me was laying on the floor, blood flowing out of her eye, moaning in pain. A man wearing a police uniform stood next to him, motionless, a kitchen knife dripping in his hand. Wait, no, not a man, a statue of Jesus Christ. I quickly entered one of the cells as the footsteps quickly approached, and then I searched the door for any lock I could activate to keep the thing out. Of course, it wouldn't work. I didn't have the key. The statue stabbed my hand through the bars, and I instinctively retreated to the back of the cell, the adrenaline stopping me from feeling most of the pain. I gripped my hand, trying to stop the blood. Only later I would realize I was now missing a pinky. The lights turned back on, and I saw the serene, emotionless state of Jesus as the statue got closer to me. And then, 3 shots. The statue fell on the floor, its limbs contorting and breaking even more in the process. Thanks Christ it was a porcelain statue. The guard, still covering her bleeding face, told me to flee before they returned, and that she now believed me. Only a few hours before, I had tried telling her how the statues of Jesus would try to kill me and anyone who stood in the way. She called me batshit insane and a Satanist. I guess Jesus statues trying to kill you aren't so hard to believe in when they're actually trying to kill you.
Luckily for me, the rest of the police station seemed to be empty, so I was easily able to get outside. Whatever happened to the other policemen? I preferred to think that they had gone outside to fix the lighting, and not that several policemen were dead because of me. Outside it was still dark, but I knew the sun would soon rise. As soon as I got to the street, a car hit me. I fell to the floor, my entire body aching, my head throbbing and my ears buzzing. I was still catatonic as the driver came out and dragged me by the hair to the car. Another statue came out of the vehicle and opened the hood. Although the car was parked, the engine had been left running. The driver statue grabbed my hair and pressed the left side of my face against the engine. And I must say, nothing ever hurt me as much as that. The statue pulled my head back, and when I was ready to burn the right side of my face, I heard a shotgun firing, and then I was suddenly thrown back to the floor. I heard a car door opening and a shotgun firing, and then when I opened my remaining eye, I saw Father Hudson, the shotgun still on his hand, coming towards me and helping me pick myself up. He told me that the court had been approved my release, but there would be more time for that later. We needed to get to the beach my great-grandfather used to dump the bodies as soon as possible. I sat on the passenger seat of Father Hudson's car, and he put some bandages on my hand to stop the bleeding. I took a quick glance at myself in the mirror as the priest started driving. No matter how many expensive surgeries I went through that I would never be able to pay in the first place, I would never get rid of those horrible scars. My left eye had literally fused together with my skin. I cried in pain, asking him how Christ could be so cruel. Father Hudson said that these murderous statues were not at all related to God or his creations. In his opinion, this curse was a satanic creation by priests that were not able to forgive those who killed them, and thus broke their Christian vows, causing the demonic curse that had destroyed so many lives. As the Bible says, even the devil likes to disguise as an angel of light. I don't know if he was right, if the statues are actually demons or manifestations of a cruel God, or maybe both of those don't exist, but the curse does. In that end, it didn't matter. What mattered is that I needed to face the errors of my bloodline's past and make amends. Suddenly, I noticed a truck following the car and gaining speed. Hudson started going faster in response. Soon, we were heading 120 km/h in a street that the limit was 70. We lost the truck, but we didn't have time to celebrate, as the father lost control of the car and we spun around on the road before finally crashing the back of the car into a bus. The car was dead, but we were alive. We left the car behind and decided to go the rest of the way on foot. To the anger of the bus driver who came out of the bus to insult us, we didn't have time to apologize, so we just ran off towards the beach. After some minutes of running like I'd never done before, and that somehow Hudson was running like a casual Saturday jog, I could already feel the sea breeze and the sand reaching my damaged skin, but there was no time for pain complaints. As we crossed the final street and finally stepped on the sand, I heard a distinct gunshot. Immediately after, Abraham grabbed me and threw himself with me on the floor. He told me that was a hunting rifle. I asked him, how did he know? And he told me that he's trained with several weapons due to his demon hunting activities. Before I could ask any other question, I heard another shot. I saw the bullet perforating some sand less than 5 feet from where I was. I had to get moving, fast. Hudson told me to keep going as he got himself up, firmly gripped the shotgun, and ran as fast as he could toward the direction where the gunshots were coming from. I then heard shooting of both the shotgun and the rifle before they both stopped. I picked myself up and stumbled towards the direction that I knew my great-grandfather had dumped the bodies. After the dictatorship fell, when the crimes finally became public, some of the corpses' dumping grounds were made known to the public, and small ceremonial crosses were installed on them. Ceremonial crosses that, thankfully, had no images of Jesus. Or so I thought. As I approached this spot, a clearing among the bushes and palm trees, I saw a cross with a figure of Jesus. I watched as the image removed himself from the cross and began running towards me. It was a small one. The 30-centimeter Jesus somehow produced a small knife and started cutting my leg. I quickly grabbed the statue and broke it limb by limb until it couldn't move anymore. I got closer to the burial ground and saw a plaque inscribed with names of several victims. Most of them, no doubt, killed by my great-grandfather. Behind me, I could hear the truck that was previously chasing us throughout the city streets crashing into the beach sand and its doors opening. I looked back. 6 man-sized Jesus were getting out of the truck and running in my direction, all carrying melee weapons. It was gonna be a very violent death. So, I kneeled before the memorial and apologized for my great-grandfather's actions. I apologized for all he did, and I promised that his crimes would never be forgiven or forgotten. That as long as I lived, I would come there annually and apologize, not only as an apology, but to make sure the memory of those who died because of his actions were not forgotten. I had my doubts it would work, but it did. When I looked back again, the Jesus statues were gone, and only the truck remained. I saw Father Abraham Hudson walking back towards me. His arm was bleeding, and he had tied a cassock around it as a tourniquet. No doubt he had been shot. I thanked him with my last remaining strength. On the horizon, the sun was finally rising, and I was finally free. I laid on the ground and looked at the clear sky. For the first time in years, I could rest without fear.